Welcome to your first set of flipped classroom notes over colonization. Notice the boundaries are different from what they are today. What do you think formed this boundary? Hint, it was a natural barrier. If you guessed the Appalachian Mountains, you are correct.
Also notice, Maine is not a separate colony. It is part of Massachusetts. I know that's weird, right? This will be quite common for colonies to claim other bits and pieces of land as their own until much later when we become our own independent country and issue the Northwest Ordinance to prevent this from happening. Don't worry, you'll learn more later.
Hopefully, you are familiar with the 3 G's of exploration: gold, God, and glory. We are just going to quickly review over these ideas.
First, we have gold. Money ruled the world. The more money you had, the more power you had. Countries were very willing to sponsor an exploration with the hopes of finding gold. Now, it wasn't only gold they were after, but also new products, spices, silk, jewels, etc. They knew these items existed, especially in Asia. So these explorations were also searching for new routes to get to Asia. The faster they could get these goods to market, the faster they could make money.
At this time, the Catholic Church pretty much ruled all of Europe. Kings and queens worked very closely with the bishops and pope. The Catholic Church was always wanting to expand. They believed it was their duty to convert everyone to Catholicism. These explorers often were accompanied by priests and were given the duty of converting the natives.
Glory is our final reason. These explorers wanted to be famous for discovering new land, new trade routes, or gold. They would bring them wealth for the rest of their lives. Hey, it didn't work. Aren't we still talking about these? Hey. Oh, I'm sorry. Hey, didn't it work? Yes, it did work. Aren't we still talking about these famous explorers today? We even have an entire day off to celebrate Christopher Columbus. Countries also wanted to claim more land as their own. Explorers would stake flags in any new territory they came across to establish a claim for their mother country. They would also let natives know that they were now members of that country. I know it sounds silly. Can you imagine someone staking an Italian flag in your yard and letting you know that you were now Italian? Back then, land equaled power. The more land you had, the more power you possessed.
It was a race among all the countries in Europe to see who could claim the most land the fastest. Again, because land equaled power. Notice it in this picture, I've got our very famous Christopher Columbus. I also included the sea monster down here. Believe it or not, many people did not feel comfortable with exploring out in the ocean because they feared these sea monsters. And so it took a long time until the Renaissance period when people became aware of what was really out in their oceans. They became more educated and became curious and wanted to find out what was out there.
Blanks.
By the way, most educated people knew that the world was round. They did not believe that it was flat at this time. So just to review what you should have in the blanks, you should have gold, God, and glory.
Reasons for colonization. All right, now to the meat and grit of it. These 4 reasons, political, social, religious, and economic, are the 4 main reasons why people came to America. In other words, this is why our country came to be. The foundation of America. Sounds awfully important to me. Make sure you know these.
If these were my notes, I would highlight, star, or somehow stress to myself that I need to know these 4 reasons. Okay, now let's look at these reasons individually.
Political freedom. The rule of kings in England had changed drastically by the time of colonization. Efforts had been made to restrict the absolute power of kings. In other words, the people fought to have representation and rights in the English government. We see the results of this effort through the Magna Carta. This is one of the documents you need to be familiar with. This was the first time we see the formation of a representative assembly like our Congress. I might write that down, like our Congress. Now, this is one huge difference between Parliament and our Congress. Only the wealthy or property owners could vote for representatives or even serve as representatives. However, this did give us an example to use when we set up Congress. The Magna Carta also stated that the king had to follow English law. What a concept.
Now, the Magna Carta held true for many years until the rule of the Stuart kings, James I, Charles I, Charles II, and James II. They believed in the divine right of kings. In other words, the king's power came from the God, and no one can disobey. Otherwise, they will be disobeying God. They also ruled with absolute power like a dictator. Whatever they said went. So let's review your blanks real quick. Here you should have Parliament. Here you should have given by God. Okay.
All right, a little bit more on political freedom. So people wanted to come to America to be able to escape this harsh rule. In the colonies, more people were able to own land and therefore were able to vote and participate in government. Also, being so far away from the king made it difficult for the king to keep the colonies under tight rule. Therefore, the colonies found their own way to govern themselves. We'll talk about this later.
Here you should have the Virginia House of Burgesses and the Massachusetts for the Mayflower Compact. We'll talk about more of those later on. Social freedom. In England, you were born into a particular social class. It was extremely difficult to move out of your class. So if you were born poor, you remained poor your entire life. On the same note, if your parents were servants, you would be a servant and your kids would be servants, and so on.
America was a unique place because even though there was still a class system, it wasn't as strict as the European social system. Also, land was cheap. More people were able to own property, which was a huge step in moving up the social ladder. Remember, land equals power. This is true even on a small scale for farmers. There was so much opportunity for people to move up in the social world in America.
Another aspect of the social reasoning is the ability of England to make the colonies, specifically Georgia, a dumping ground for criminals, debtors, and other unworthy peeps. This was really an opportunity for these people to get a second lease on life.
What country was founded for this reason? If you said Australia, you are correct.
Let's review. Right here you should have a dumping ground. Religious freedom and the Protestant Reformation. In Europe, the Roman Catholic Church was really the only religion allowed to be practiced. Even kings and queens deferred, looked to the Pope for direction. In fact, sometimes decisions had to be made with the Pope's permission. Now, of course, there were very few practiced other religions, Islam, Judaism, etc. But in some countries, you had to pledge your allegiance to the Catholic Church. Martin Luther, and he is not related to Martin Luther King, was a Catholic monk. Monks spent a lot of time studying the Bible and beliefs, and Martin began to question some of these beliefs. Pretty soon, he had enough to write an entire paper about these protests against the Catholic Church. This began what became known as the Protestant Reformation. You get it? Protest, Protestant. Pretty clever, I say. And so began the start of many new Protestant churches. Some of these new churches had what some people considered to be radical beliefs, and therefore they persecuted these people. So naturally, these people didn't want to stay and listen to all this harassment. And remember, in some countries, you had to join a certain church. So these people picked up and moved their entire congregation, that's their church group, to America.
We'll talk more about specific colonies soon.
This right here should be Martin Luther. And this should be Protestant churches.
Here is an example of some of the beliefs that Protestants had compared to Catholics. Notice the location of the king.
So here's the Pope and so forth. And then here's the king, God, king, cardinals. Okay, and that's the Anglican church there.
King Henry VIII. Oh, you're going to let me do this one?
Yeah, I thought so.
I love this story. King Henry VIII was a Catholic king.
My song didn't work. I'm sorry. It's a really good song.
Oh. King Henry VIII was a Catholic king. That is, in the beginning. He married Catherine of Aragon, who was also Spanish, and they had a lovely girl, Mary. However, every king in the world wants and needs a son to be the heir to the throne, and Catherine did not produce any sons for King Henry. During this time, a lovely young lady, Anne Boleyn, came to Henry's attention. She flirted and flirted with Henry and drove him mad with her advances. Eventually, she convinced him to leave his wife and marry her instead. With the Protestant Reformation in progress, Henry decided to create his own church, the Anglican Church, one that would grant him a divorce, which the Catholic Church refused to do. Once divorced, he married the beautiful temptress Anne Boleyn, and they had a lovely child, Elizabeth. Unfortunately for Anne, she produced no son, and soon Henry was tempted again by a new lady, Jane Seymour. However, he decided not to divorce Anne. Instead, there were rumors of some bad dealings involving Anne, and Henry used this to have her executed.
Off with her head!
And now, widowed, Henry married Jane Seymour and gave him a son, Edward. Unfortunately, Jane died in childbirth, and Edward was quite the sickly child. Therefore, Henry decided he must have another wife to produce another son. Anne of Cleves became the fourth Mrs. Henry VIII. She produced no heirs, and soon Henry became bored with Anne of Cleves, so he divorced her. What a surprise.
So then he married Catherine Howard, another young lady here, who's pictured here, who also used her flirtation to get his attention. Unfortunately for Catherine, she didn't produce any heirs, and he soon decided that she was also up to no good. So he had her executed as well.
Off with her head!
His last wife, Catherine Parr, did not produce any heirs as well, but guess what? Lucky for her, she outlived him. And so King Henry VIII died while still married to Catherine Parr. So if you were keeping track, that was divorced, beheaded, died, divorced, beheaded, survived. Economic opportunity. When you hear the word economy or any form of that word, you should automatically think money. In fact, I would write that down. Economic equals money. As you can imagine, many people came to America to make money. Some thought they would strike it rich instantly with discovering gold. Others thought the land might provide other valuable resources, which it did. Tobacco. The land in the southern colonies was perfect for farming. This is where we really see lots of cash crops being grown. What do we mean when we say cash crops? If you said cash crops grown for money, not for food, you are correct. Land was very hard to come by in England. Really, only the wealthy truly owned land. The lower classes had to rent the land.
Many individuals looked at America as a way to make money. Some came themselves and established a variety of businesses. Others invested their monies into the startup of the colonies and therefore made money off of these businesses. Monarchs did this as well. They would issue a charter establishing a contract between citizens and the king that would grant the citizens land here in the colonies in exchange for a slice of the profit pie. Back the blanks.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Okay, so right here, monarchs like
to make money off
but I
of the
forgot
colonies.
to put 2 there.
Oh.
Monarchs like to make money off of the colony. Sorry about that typo. Okay. So we're going to stop right there for this one.